Have you ever felt that feeling of being outnumbered? I'm sure you have in one sense of the word or another. I personally cannot stand that feeling. It's come several times and in several different ways, and can come that way for many of us in our lives on a daily basis as well, whether it's being the only Christian in a world surrounded by those who do not believe the same way that we do. Many of you in your workplaces or in school have the same sort of experience, or at least did during those years, where you are the only one in that isolated group of people who has an outlook based upon godliness and righteousness. But it can come in many ways, even silly ways. I think about this a lot of times with the popularity of these gender reveal parties and things, and co-ed baby showers that have started these days. I've been invited to a few of those and gone to those, and as we've gone through the process of these things, you think, boy, I don't belong here. And your anxiety lifts up, and your palms start sweating, and that whole thing that goes on. Perhaps it was a memory of a sporting event when you played on a team and the other team looked like giants, as the illustration of the passage which we're going to study this morning as we spend our time in both chapter 13 and 14 of Numbers, if you'd like to join me there. I remember when I was still playing handicap baseball back in my high school years in the 10th grade. We played another team in the league very much like that. And my team, I have to say, despite my efforts, at least on the defensive side of the field, I never was much good with a glove. I enjoyed hitting, though. My team was pretty decent, but this team, I have seen some balls hit by some men in that group that I think are still somewhere floating over the city of Moody today, even all these years later. I remember in the 10th grade, they had this one player with arms the size of tree trunks. I mean, they were this big around. And he hit a ball so far out above right field that I didn't even try to go after it at any point during that game. I felt overwhelmed that entire game. Your palms sweat, your anxiety's high, you're just trying anything to survive. No one likes that feeling of being outnumbered. But you know, there are different emotions which are brought up from being outnumbered. There's the emotion of fear, there's that anxiety that we've talked about. And depending on what your position is, there can be a feeling of disappointment, a feeling of discouragement that comes along with that as well. So what I want to focus on together as we focus on these two chapters of the Bible this morning is this feeling of being outnumbered, and two different directions from which we can see these reactions this morning. Because often when we study this passage, what do we talk about? We talk about the lack of faith of those 10 spies who did not believe that they, as the people of God, could conquer the land. And we talk about the great faith, which we should, of Joshua and Caleb, and how important that was. But as we look at this morning, I want us to look at it from this idea of being outnumbered. Because on both sides, you see groups of people who feel outnumbered. Either on the side of the spies, where they feel outnumbered because of the influence of those outside sources, the giants in the land, and it causes them to react in a certain way. But have you ever thought about how Caleb and Joshua felt? On the side of God, in righteousness, being outnumbered 10-2. And more than that, as the people began to react and base their own decisions and their own reactions to this situation on what the majority said, how they must have felt being in the minority in that moment, being outnumbered by such a great amount. Yet they knew, with God's help, they could conquer. I think one thing that we often forget when we study this passage and we analyze these people, these Israelites, these members of God's covenant people, one thing that we often look past or forget about in that moment as we study that is they all started out from the same place. At one time, they were all one unit in this situation. They had the same mission, they had the same goal, and they were putting forth the same effort. Look at it with me beginning in verse 1. You see, it comes by divine command. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." 12 spies, we know full well. Now, isn't this interesting? Moses goes and he calls out these men, one from each tribe. We know Joshua and Caleb by name. We don't know the others by name. Isn't that interesting? We'll point that out in a little bit more detail later on in the lesson, but hold on to that. He goes and he pulls these men out. Can you imagine him, Moses that is, debriefing them about what they're about to do and basically just telling them exactly what the Lord had commanded them to do? Go and spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving the children of Israel. Question: did they not know what they were going to do? Absolutely. In Moses choosing them to do so, they would be given this mission to go and spy out the land which the Lord was going to give to them. So they knew the purpose of what they were doing. They're starting out from the same point. They know the same purpose, and they set forth to do it. Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord. All of them, men who are heads of the children of Israel. Here's something interesting. They were heads of the children of Israel. These were not sheepish men, were they? They would have been leaders of their respective tribes in that moment. They were respected enough to be chosen for this mission, one from each tribe. And he goes down through each one of these as they were pointed out. Caleb and Joshua are still remembered today, and yet we do not remember this list. As detailed as it is, we never remember the rest of these names on this list. That's what I wanted to point out. You see, hold on to this for later on. The righteousness of God and acting upon that righteousness has a lasting effect. Yes, these men's names are recorded. Yes, we read through this passage every time we go through our yearly Bible reading plans. Yes, we study this passage from time to time in sermons such as we are this morning. But yet, we don't remember the rest of these names. They're listed here, but they are quickly forgotten. These are the names of the men who Moses sent out to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun, Joshua. So, these men were chosen to spy out the land. Leaders of their country, meaning that they had some sort of prominence in their tribe. Meaning that they were not necessarily weak men. But oh, what weakness do they show in the future. They send them out to spy out the land of Canaan, verse 17. Go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell there in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, or whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests or not. Be of good courage. Notice, not only did they start out from the same position, but they were given the same mission and they were given the same charge. Be of good courage. Moses obviously must have suspected at some point that these men might find themselves in the midst of some sort of challenge. Could it be said for us as Christians, as God's people today, that though we are given the same message and we all start from the same place as children of God, babes in the family of God, that we can assume we're going to find challenges from time to time? Challenges which might make us feel outnumbered. Absolutely. Remember what Moses told them to do here. Be of good courage and bring some fruit of the land. Give us some evidence. Give us some proof of what you see. But that wasn't enough. You had to give them that little bit of motivation. Be of good courage. And so they go and they spy out the land. And they came back, beginning in verse 46, after spying out the land after 40 days. So one thing that we have to understand is that though this judgment was made by these men, these 10 men versus Joshua and Caleb, it was not a snap judgment. Sometimes when we read it, I feel like we get the impression that this is something that they went and took a little peek over the border, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's giants in the land, there's nothing we can do. They've spent 40 days now journeying throughout this land, through this path which Moses had given them to do. Look it over, overview all of it, and give us a report. This was not a snap decision. These 12 men have been journeying in this hostile territory for 40 days. Can you imagine what it would take to be able to do that and spy it out and not be seen for that amount of time? It would certainly take a good amount of effort. So this was not a quick decision. This was something that they made, a decision which they made over several days. But then they come back and they begin to report. Notice what they say. They told him and said, verse 27, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and there it is, and this is its fruits. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. The Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. So they've done a thorough inspection here. But they seem and they feel as though they are outnumbered. Caleb quieted the people. What does that tell you? This report causes what? An uproar among the people. Just this evidence was enough to stir the people up to a clamor, and Caleb quiets them. In that moment, though he spent the same 40 days with these other 11 men at this moment, Joshua, of course, would be on his side as well. But Caleb stands up among this same group that have spent this 40 days spying out this land, coming to this decision, and he is looking at it. With as great as these peoples are, as large as they may be, as fortified as their cities are, is this: let us go up at once. Notice he did not want to wait. Though this was a true task, this was a huge task. He said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. You see, though the rest of them may be overwhelmed, as we'll see in the next few verses, to the point that because of those outside influences, they're ready to give up, they're ready to quit. Caleb looks at those same things and says, we're still able to overcome it. Why? Because he remembered the original mission statement. Go out and spy the land which God said he was giving to the children of Israel. Go get it. God is on our side. He will not allow us to fail. And yet, look at the majority. And the men who'd gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people. We cannot do this." They looked, they spent 40 days, they observed, they saw all the good, but yet their minds are so clearly focused on what? That tunnel vision of all the bad things. Here is a land which flows with milk and honey. Here is a land which produces wonderful crops which would be able to sustain them as a people. A large group of people, by the way. Some scholars say when they left Egypt to begin the Exodus, that this could be somewhere between 2 and 4 million people. And yet, they see the size of these people. They see their cities. They're looking at it from this worldly standpoint. And all they can see are these things, and they say, "We cannot do it. For the people, they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature." Notice, they knew all the blessings that were present in that land, and yet they left all of that out. Because they were so narrowly focused on that which frightened them, that which overwhelmed them, that which caused them to feel outnumbered, that it skewed their view so much that when they are tell the people, all they can say is that this land, it devours its inhabitants. You're surely going to die if we go into this place, because its inhabitants are of great stature. There's no way we can defeat them. There we saw the giants again telling of those descendants of Anak, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Can you imagine the effect that that has on this people? That though they are a large number of people, just because the majority of these spies come back with this bad report, what it does is it takes a people who have been watched over and who have been helped and who have been blessed by God through this entire process, immediately turn their hearts from Him. Notice, all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation, notice, the whole congregation said to them, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? If only we had died where we started. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" And so they said to one another, "Let's select a leader and return to Egypt." Isn't it amazing what being overwhelmed will do? Being outnumbered, their immediate reaction when all they see is the outside influences, when all they are focusing on is what is actually physically there, and they forget God, their immediate reaction is to what? To turn their hearts from Him, complain about what's going on, and simply choose to give up. And when we choose to give up, isn't it interesting how the things of the past, though more difficult than we could imagine or perhaps remember, seem to look a lot better? Here's where the modern application to this comes in. There are going to be times in the days in which we live where we feel that feeling of outnumberedness. We as Christians, as those who are seeking out to be righteous, may feel the same way, 100 to 1 outnumbered, and it may cause us to say we cannot overcome. We cannot endure. We cannot keep going? What is it worth still standing up for what is right? What is it worth still trying to do what is right when there is so much evil around us and seems more like evil is growing day by day? And so, for some, perhaps the temptation comes around that says, when I was in the world, things were never this bad. When I was in the world, I never struggled this much. When I was in the world, I had this or that. Wouldn't it just be easier to go back to it? To the point where they'll say something similar. Let's return to Egypt. Let's return to that old life, to that time of bondage. These people were slaves in Egypt. We, in the world prior to our coming to Christ, are what? Slaves and in bondage to sin. And yet, in a great moment of difficulty and temptation, it brings that out of us sometimes, doesn't it? Wouldn't it be better for us to return to the land of Egypt? Don't you remember what it was like in the land of Egypt in the book of Exodus prior to Moses delivering them? How their taskmasters worked them so hard. How they were even unable to make the bricks that they were being commanded to make in order to carry out the task they were given by the Egyptian government. So much that they were so sore oppressed that God said to Moses from the burning bush, Exodus chapter 3, what? I have heard the cries of my people, crying out in bondage. And yet how many times through this period of time, from that point forward, have they already gone back to this same excuse? This is not the first time. Do you remember when they cried out for food in the early days of the wilderness wandering? Why have you brought us out here to die? Oh, that we could go back to the flesh pots in Egypt. You see, their perspective the entire time is focused on one thing and one thing only. What is it? It's worldliness. When you take God and you forget Him and you put Him behind you, all these outside influences that overwhelm us, they will consume us to the point that we are ready to give up. Oh, that we would have died in the wilderness. I would have been better off to not ever have known what it is to be a Christian. I've heard some people say that sometimes. When I was in the world, I never had to face these problems that I have to face. I never had to face these temptations. But yet, what are they giving up? You see, for these people, they were giving up a land which flows milk and honey. That which was promised to them, which would sustain them as a people forever in the case of that covenant. And oh, for us today, when we allow that kind of being outnumbered and overwhelmed to cause us to get back into that mindset, what are we giving up as well? The same. A land flowing with milk and honey, yes, but not one that is here. One that is in eternity and shall never, never be corrupted. But there's another side to this as well. Can you imagine what it caused to be in the minds of Joshua and Caleb in the midst of all of this, and Moses and Aaron? In all of this chaos, as the majority of people say, we cannot do it. They've forgotten everything that God had done for them up until that point, and they are ready to give up. They stand alone, falling before the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh were among those who spied out the land. They tore their clothes. They, in the midst of being outnumbered by this great host, are now in what? A period of mourning and great discouragement. So many people focused on worldly things, even among the congregation of God's people. Because that's something that we have to remember too. These were all God's covenant people. And yet the majority of them were ready to give up. Ready to quit. And what was it doing? They were affected, yes, by the outside temptations that were discouraging them to the point of giving up. But even those who were holding out righteousness and striving to serve God, now they are in this position of mourning, renting their clothes and crying out, seeing what is missing here, seeing the lack of faith. And what discouragement must have been in their minds. What downheartedness by being outnumbered by those of their own family, of their own tribes, the children of Israel, who were unwilling to do what was necessary in order to receive that blessing. They tore their clothes. They're in mourning. And they speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceeding good land. You see, with the proper faith, Joshua and Caleb had a very different report than what we'd previously seen in the previous passages. All these people who were so discouraged with their worldly mindset could see was a land that devoured its people and giants that would stomp them like grasshoppers. But yet with the faith of knowing that God was behind them, that He would deliver them, what did they say? The land we passed through and spied out is an exceeding good. Not just good, but an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. That's a big if, isn't it? I don't know which side we may be on this morning. We may be on the side of those who are a part of God's family, but yet are so discouraged because maybe our eyes are not set upon the right direction. We know what our mission is. We know that we are to live holy and righteous lives before God, and yet we're so focused on the things we see in the everyday world that we forget Him. And we're ready to turn our backs on Him, and we're ready to give up, and that's discouraging everyone else in the congregation who is striving to live after righteousness. Take heed to these words, because the promise is still true today. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into that land which flows with milk and honey. When you feel outnumbered, you feel like everything that we're doing is not worth the doing, but yet if we're faithful, He will deliver us according to His promises. They cried out. They put forth this message of hope. And they reminded them, do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. There's no reason to fear the exterior things of the world around us today. Not ultimately. Yes, might we have to endure some things that will be uncomfortable? Yes, might we have to endure some times that are going to be hard, and we're seeing them in front of us even right now? Yes. But we should not fear, because the same God that would be with them if they are faithful and did not rebel against Him is the same God who will be with us and will be faithful to us and will deliver us. They are bread in our sight. These giants, whatever they may be in our lives today, and we could name 1 billion, they have no power over us as we are faithful to God. Do not fear them. In the midst of their discouragement, here's what's different. In the midst of being overwhelmed, their faith calls them to stand up. It calls them to speak. Even in the midst of when the rest of God's people did not want to do that which was necessary in that moment. They stood up and did what was right. And even then, the results aren't 100%. I always heard the old preacher stories. They rejected Jesus. What makes you, as a young preacher, they would say, what makes you think they will not turn from you? They will not turn from the words which you preach. And it's true, because the same thing happens here. In the midst of this heartfelt message of hope, what is the congregation's reaction? All the congregation, being outnumbered by all these peoples, said to stone them with stones. Comparison of those who are overwhelmed in their reaction in a worldly mindset, it just leads to more worldliness, it leads to more trouble, and it leads to chaos. But even when those who are righteous stand up, at times it'll fall upon deaf ears. So much so that even the Lord cries out in frustration with them. The Lord said to Moses as their spokesperson, again, this is the same people who saw the very presence of God come down on Mount Sinai, saw the majesty and the magnitude of it, and were afraid of it. Who are saying, in essence, that this God cannot overcome these 9-foot tall men, cannot overcome these giants in this land. The fickleness of human nature, it amazes me, and I know we all find ourselves in that position more often than not. But notice what he says. How long will these people reject me, and how long will they not believe me with all the signs that I have performed among them? Daniel, does that sound familiar? Have we not been seeing the same thing in our study of John? Even when the Messiah was there, people are still doing the same thing. Among God's people, this was still being said. How long will they do this? God is so frustrated, he says, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make you a nation mightier and greater than they. But oh, Moses, as the type of Christ, I love the type and shadow here, as he stands in the gap between them and God. Despite their attitude, he stands for them, and he intercedes for the people in this moment. Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, and for by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land. They will hear you, and what they have heard that the Lord is among these people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nation which you have heard, which has heard of your fame, will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people to the land which he swore to give them, therefore he killed them in the wilderness. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. He intercedes for the people. Pardon and mercy. What hope can we have is that we have a far greater intercessor. Even in moments when we may find ourselves on the side of those who were lacking in faith to God, he is still interceding as long as we still strive. If we will strive, we can be forgiven of those things. For those of us who are righteous, who set forth that which is right, we will be fulfilled with the promises which are given. Joshua and Caleb would see that happen. So many in that group would not. But yet they survived to see it. They saw the land. Caleb at 86 years old says, "Give me this mountain which I've been promised." And he's able to take it, and it's an inheritance for his family. You see, there's different ways to react to being outnumbered. Our physical mindsets, if we're focused on worldly things, will cause us to see only the bad, never the good, never the blessings, and want to give up. But those of us who know that God is always behind us should have the attitude of Joshua and Caleb. Let us go up at once and take this land, because we are well able to overcome it. Let us hold fast to the mission that we have been given as God's people in today's world, for we are well able to achieve it to the best of our ability with God's help. Never give up. Because if we will be faithful, what? He will deliver us to that land flowing with milk and honey. Where do you find yourself this morning? On the side of those who could only see the negative in the land? On the side of those who saw so much evil around them, so much bad, so much difficulty around them, that their only answer was give up and run. Their anxiety got so high, their palms were sweating, all they wanted to do was run. Ultimately, those people would be running to their own death. And it's the same for us spiritually. Or are you on the side of Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb? Be faithful, for the Lord is able to deliver us. It's a mighty powerful thought, isn't it? To know that if we will endure but these few days that we have left on this old earth, that one day we will dwell with Him in eternity in heaven, no longer concerned about all the things that so often consume our minds today. Do you feel outnumbered? You're never, ever, ever outnumbered with God. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation this morning, whether to become a child of God by obeying the gospel, repenting of your sins, confessing your belief in Christ, and being baptized for the remission of your sins, so that you can have that hope of eternal life, that hope of a land which flows with milk and honey, far greater than this world in which we live now. That opportunity is available for you this morning. Or perhaps you've already done that, like most of us in this audience this morning, but you find yourself focused more on the things of this world and not on the God who will be able to help you endure it. Won't you turn back to Him? Place your faith in Him and live for Him, that you might ultimately be blessed with that same promise, that you might see it come to fruition. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation for any reason, won't you come as we stand and sing this song to encourage?